All this time, you thought Trump was the tyrant. Well, Bernie is going to go full FDR. According to the Washington Post, he's planning to declare climate change a national emergency. He's going to ban U.S. exports of crude oil. He's going to import prescription drugs from Canada, cancel federal contracts for companies that pay their workers less than $15 an hour, direct the Department of Justice to legalize marijuana at the federal level, and reverse existing rules that bar the U.S. from funding organizations that provide abortion services. He's also going to immediately halt the construction of President Donald Trump's U.S.-Mexico border wall and lift the cap on the number of refugees the U.S. accepts each year, and of course release billions in disaster aid to Puerto Rico that the Trump administration has withheld. So what is now scaring left-wing legal academics is that Trump is across the board nominating federal judges, most notably Supreme Court Justices Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch, that subscribe to the understanding that Congress has delegated too much of its legislative powers to executive branch agencies that issue regulations that carry the weight of law. In the end, that means only Congress, not judges, not federal agencies, can create laws. Now, way back in 1690, in his second treatise of civil government, John Locke wrote, quote, "The legislative cannot transfer the power of making laws to any other hands, for it being but a delegated power from the people. They who have it cannot pass it over to others. And when the people have said, we will submit to rules and be governed by laws made by such men and in such forms, nobody else can say other men shall make laws for them, nor can the people be bound by any laws, but such as are enacted by those whom they have chosen and authorized to make laws for them. The power of the legislative being derived from the people by a positive, voluntary grant and institution can be no other than what the positive grant conveyed, which being only to make laws and not to make legislators. The legislative can have no power to transfer their authority of making laws and place it in other hands," unquote. Now, this was also debated as early as 1825 in the New Republic. John Marshall, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, weighed in on non-delegation in the 1825 case, Wayman versus Southard. Chief Justice Marshall distinguished between, quote, important subjects and mere details. He wrote, quote, "A general provision may be made and the power given to those who are to act under such general provision to fill up the details," unquote. In other words, the big, broad legislative powers were reserved to the Congress, period. Now, most recently, in the case of Gundy versus the United States, a case that involved, this is going to be tough, the sex offender registration, Congress allowed the Attorney General to compel sex offenders who were convicted before, that's the key word, before the act came into effect to register without a new act of Congress. Okay, let me just take a pause here. None of us like sex offenders. Nobody's defending sex offenders here. That's not the point. The point is that the Department of Justice cannot enforce a law that doesn't exist. Justice Brett Kavanaugh scared the left half to death with this one, Slate.com, quote, "On Monday, Justice Brett Kavanaugh sent the clearest signal yet that the Supreme Court's conservative majority is ready to take a wrecking ball to federal regulations. By doing so, the court could jeopardize a vast swath of laws that govern pollution, Wall Street, wage and hour rules, campaign finance limits, and more." Kavanaugh's fellow conservative justices already declared their disdain for the administrative state, that is, the agencies that interpret and enforce federal law. In June's Gundy v. United States, all four conservatives argued for a revival of the non-delegation doctrine, which bars Congress from transferring its legislative power to another branch of government. But Kavanaugh did not join the court in time to hear Gundy. As a result, Justice Elena Kagan and her fellow liberals were able to stave off an assault on the federal bureaucracy. Well, That's very interesting. And again, nobody is defending sex offenders here. But here's an excerpt from Kagan's opinion. Quote, "Is there a non-delegation problem with a statute that instructs the Attorney General to apply registration requirements to pre-act offenders as soon as feasible? That question is easy," wrote Kagan. No, citing a string of very broad delegations that the Supreme Court has upheld since 1935. Kagan sized SORNA's delegation as distinctly small bore in comparison. Moreover, she added, if SORNA's delegation is unconstitutional, most of the government is unconstitutional. Congress is dependent on the need to give discretion to executive officials charged with implementing its programs. The court's long-standing course of refusing to second-guess these necessities of government is, Kagan concluded, one of both wisdom and humility. Unquote. Well, what Kagan just did there was go to the legal mat to protect the ability of federal agencies to act on their own accord. She even admits that if not for accepting this, most of the federal government would be, yes, unconstitutional. Okay, so here's the argument. Yes, it's time for President Trump to pack the courts with judges that will actually make Congress do its job. Since the 1930s, the administrative state has only grown and expanded. Unelected, unaccountable people have been pushing out rule after rule after rule after rule that stand in for the work of legislative law. This has been going on forever. And Congress's power to conduct oversight, it's not an excuse for the legislative branch to take a backseat, then step in after the bureaucrats have so overstepped their authority and the villagers have come for them with torches. Elections have consequences, they say. Actually, they don't. No matter who we've elected, the big government ball just kept on bouncing. Federal agencies have penetrated every aspect of our day-to-day lives. And you know what? We can't vote out bureaucrats. We don't even know their names. And that's the point. Most of us, even people within government, could never map out all of its moving parts. I mean, even presidents sometimes find themselves surprised by the actions of their own administration. Do you ever wonder how a puddle on a farm became navigable waters? The EPA did that on their own. What about transgender bathrooms in public schools? The Department of Education just did that on their own. I'll give you that Obama wanted that one. But wait until we have single payer and people you've never heard of are deciding whether you live or die. I could go on and on all day on this. The left has long believed there should be no impediment to federal agencies to, as they view it, promote a general good. But if we didn't have limits on the federal government and divided powers to prevent a general bad, what would stop a president from rounding up a group of citizens deemed less than worthy? Let's say gun owners, rounded up by the executive branch. If you're saying that couldn't happen, well, how do you think we got internment? And by the way, FDR, progressive. So yes, the left should worry about non-delegation doctrine, and we should make their fears come true. It's time to smash big government.